Okay, so we implemented the component going out to the service, the client service, and generating an HTTP request to the server. But it came back as a 404 because the server doesn't yet know what to do with that request. Okay, so let's implement that next. So what we could do, we already have, on the server side, we have an entry point to our server-side application, right, implemented under app.js. Yes? And app.js is being passed as an argument an instance of the Express library, right, that allows us to create listeners for URLs, right, that come back with gets, posts, and deletes and whatnot. Right now we have several services that are listening for incoming requests for users, for widgets, and whatnot. Right, let's add one to handle websites. Right, we don't have one for websites, so let's do that. Let's create here under the services directory a service, a server-side service using just plain old JavaScript. And let's call website.service.server.js, right? So this is the mirror image to the client service that we just implemented, yes? The client-side version is running on the browser, right, across one side of the country. This service is running on Node.js on the server side on the other half, on the other side of the country, right? And now they're going to talk to one another. The client is running on the browser, which is sending an HTTP request, which is going to be handled by this one. Yes? Right, obviously here they're both running on my same machine, right? But when it's deployed, right, you don't know where the browser is going to be running. Right? Whoever is accessing your server, right, wherever they are geographically in the world. All right, so let's implement, just like you can implement modules on Angular, right, using export and classes and singletons and injectable and things like that. On Node.js, you can do similar things, but with its own set of idiosyncrasies, right? This is not Angular. This is Node.js, right, running on the server. So you implement modules in a different syntax, okay? But it's the same idea. Here we're creating a self-contained module, and we're exporting a function, which takes as argument an instance of the Express library. Yes? And we're going to load it from our single point of entry. This is our single application. Right? We're going to require our brand new service, which we just declared, and it's called the website service server, and we pass in the instance of the app, right, which we are receiving right here. Yes? Which is being passed from server.js, right, that had started this whole thing. Okay, now that we have the instance of the server, of the Express server, we can say, well, there is an incoming request, an HTTP GET request that is incoming, and it has the following pattern. API, user, let's see. There it is. This is the pattern. All right, we copy that. We can paste it here. That's the incoming request coming from the browser, right? And this, instead of being hard-coded 345, that will be the user ID, so that we can retrieve the websites for that particular user. Okay? And we're going to handle it in this function. In the function called, and I'm going to use the same name for the function that I used on the client side. And I forget what I called it on the client side. We called it find websites for user. I'm going to call it the same name here. All right, just to keep it straight in my head. Right? That I know that function on the client is going to call this function on the server through the HTTP call. Yes? All right, and I'm going to implement it in a function of the same name. Again, this is all naming conventions, right? It's whatever you decide to call it, but this is a good naming convention. All right, so this is these two files, on the client side and on the server side, they are on opposite ends, right, of the HTTP protocol. Yes, right. Whereas the client side on the service on the client is converting an object-oriented world of Angular components, yes, is converting it into a serialized HTTP world, right? And it's serializing this data across a network, correct? It's the boundary between the object component world in Angular and the HTTP world, right? This is where the boundary of our application ends on the client side. On the other side, right, this service on the server is on the other side of the boundary, right? It does the opposite, right? It takes in a serialized HTTP world, right, with cookies and headers and timestamps and whatnot, right, and JSON ASCII code and whatnot, right, and it provides to me an object representation of that data, right? It's a very low-level object representation, which presumably we're going to convert into a higher-level data model at some point. Yes? But right now we are at opposite ends of a very low-level protocol. Yes? Right? So let's see. And so the responsibility of this class, of this module, is to deal with the conversion between the low-level HTTP idiosyncrasies of path parameters, query parameters, URLs, and bodies, and headers, and cookies. All that is very low-level HTTP, right? And convert it into a high-level business or application-wide data model. Yes? So these are the boundary layers. Okay. So I'm going to, for instance, parse this user ID, right, which is, again, is part of the low-level HTTP protocol. So I'm going to parse the user ID from the request params. It's a map. Okay. Now that I have the ID, presumably I'm going to look up this data of the websites for this particular user, right? Typically, I would go out to a database to fetch this, but I don't have that, right? For now, I'm just going to mock the data. I'm going to copy it from Angular. I think we mocked it over there. Where is it? I think it's this one, right? I'm just going to copy this, and only because it has these values here. And we're going to go to our service on the server side. I'm going to paste that mock here, website mock. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to change it to JavaScript. And most of this is useless because it's Angular specific, so I don't need this. This is creating a module, so we can export this. We can say, we can declare this as a variable, local variable of websites, being just an array, okay, of objects, where this is an ID, and these are the names, and this is just a plain Java object, JavaScript object. So let me change this to a low level. Let me do this for all these. Okay, and let's do this for the names. And then here, there we go. Okay, now that we declare a variable, we can export it as a module. We can just say module.exports equals websites. Okay, so that now on my service, on the server, I can just load it up. I can just say var websites require website mock. Yes, I have it. And for now, let's return. Let's ignore user ID for a second, right? Because my client side is broken, right? 0. Let's fix it. And for now, I'm just going to respond and send back all the websites. For now, right? Just to see that the communication between the client and the server is working. All right, we'll add the filter in a minute, right? Okay, so let's restart our servers, our Node.js server. Let's see if it broke, if it exploded. Okay, it looks like we didn't have any exceptions. Let's put a breakpoint. Make sure that when we restart, indeed we are entering and loading that file. Yes, looks like we are. Let's put a breakpoint here. See if now, if the client comes back, see if we're hitting that URL. If this URL is actually executing this code over here. All right, so let's go back to our client, and if refresh, okay, it still failed. Why did you fail? Let's see, http://localhost 3100 API. Let me see, let me copy that. And my battery's dying. Why is my battery dying? Because I never plugged this in. So I copied this URL, and let's see if I put it here. All right, so it comes back as a server. My server, but it looks like my server's not running. Is it running? Oh no, it was stuck at that breakpoint. It was stuck at that breakpoint. Let me see if I refresh again. Okay, it is hitting it. It is hitting that URL. Let's do continue. So notice that I hit it just from the browser right here as a raw URL. This is what Angular is going to do, right? It's going to generate this URL. So let's try it again. Let's refresh. Okay, it's hitting the server. There it is. We can step through it. We can see the user ID. It's parsing in 345. It's correctly parsing it from the server side. Let's continue. And now we went back to the client, and the Angular is back where it was earlier, right? And now again, regardless of who I log in, I always get the same data. But the data is now hard-coded on the server, not hard-coded on the client. See that? Right? And notice that the server is now coming back. The original request, it used to be 404. Now it's coming with a 200, okay? And there's actual data coming back from the server. Right? What are we doing with it? We're just assigning it to the array of websites, which is then rendered on the template. That makes sense? All right. So the next thing we need to do is not return all the websites. We want to return only those websites for that particular user. Right? We want to filter, right? And use the actual user ID to be able to say, oh, it's only these websites or those websites, depending on who logs in. Make sense? So let's do that next.
Is that website thread safe?
I'm sorry?
Is the website array on the server thread safe?
Yes. Yep.